A greedy builder tried to scam Tony Accardo for $500,000. The boss did not negotiate, he poured him into a concrete foundation. But the most terrifying part of this story is not the fact that a man was buried alive beneath thousands of pounds of wet cement. The truly disturbing part is exactly how Tony Accardo convinced this man to walk directly into his own permanent tomb with a massive, arrogant smile on his face. He did not have to send a team of armed hitmen to drag the target kicking and screaming from his home in the middle of the night. He did not have to create a messy public spectacle that would draw the attention of federal investigators or local law enforcement. Instead, the ultimate criminal mastermind used the builder's own blinding greed and monumental ego to completely obscure the trap until it was far too late to escape. In this video, we are going to break down one of the most psychological, calculated, and chilling executions in the long and bloody history of the Chicago outfit. You are going to see exactly how a mid-level commercial contractor genuinely believed he had outsmarted the most dangerous syndicate in America, and the horrifying, silent revenge that the mafia meticulously planned for him deep underground in the cold, unyielding earth. To truly comprehend the sheer, staggering magnitude of the mistake this contractor made, you have to understand the apex predator he decided to steal from. Antonino Accardo, known to the public as Tony and known to his deeply terrified subordinates as Joe Batters, was not just another gangster. If you look at the history of the American mafia, you see men who were blinded by the spotlight. Men like Al Capone or John Gotti craved the attention of the media. They wore custom-tailored silk suits, they dined at the center tables of the most exclusive restaurants, and they basked in the dangerous celebrity status that their crimes afforded them. Tony Accardo viewed that kind of behavior as an absolute vulnerability. He was the invisible ghost of Chicago. While Capone died a broken man and Gotti spent his final years rotting away in a maximum security federal penitentiary, Tony Accardo ruled the most violent and sprawling criminal empire in the United States for over 5 decades and never spent a single night in a jail cell. He achieved this unprecedented level of longevity through absolute, impenetrable insulation. He built a syndicate that generated untold millions of dollars every single week through illegal underground casinos, vast sports betting networks, heavy union control, and sprawling extortion rackets. Yet his signature was never found on a single piece of paper. He communicated exclusively in quiet whispers. He gave his lethal orders through a complex, confusing labyrinth of loyal underbosses and street-level captains so deeply layered that the Federal Bureau of Investigation could never trace a crime back to his living room. Accardo was a criminal grandmaster playing chess while law enforcement and rival gangs were playing checkers. He did not rule his city through loud, chaotic, and unpredictable violence. He ruled through the terrifying and absolute certainty of cold, efficient consequences. When a serious problem arose in his territory, Accardo did not throw a tantrum or scream threats over a wiretap telephone. He simply nodded his head, and the problem vanished from the face of the earth, leaving behind no witnesses, no murder weapon, and no body for the authorities to find. This was the quiet, untouchable titan that a desperate and overly ambitious commercial builder decided to target for a massive payday. The target of Accardo's eventual wrath was a man deeply entrenched in the lucrative but highly corrupt world of Chicago commercial construction. During this era, the city skyline was expanding rapidly, with massive new industrial complexes, towering office buildings and sprawling warehouses being erected at a frantic pace. It was an environment overflowing with cash, heavy machinery, and endless opportunities for graft. This builder was a man driven by extreme arrogance and a desperate need to project immense wealth. He wanted the expensive cars, the luxury homes, and the respect of the city's elite, but his legitimate business margins were simply not enough to fund his extravagant lifestyle. He had recently secured a highly lucrative multi-million-dollar contract to pour the deep structural foundations for a massive new industrial logistics center on the desolate outskirts of the city. It was the kind of massive project that could set a contractor up for life. What this builder did not fully appreciate, or perhaps what he simply chose to arrogantly ignore, was the dark reality of who was actually funding the project. The powerful labor unions providing the manpower for the site, the heavy logistics companies delivering the steel, and the shadowy network of silent investors financing the massive operation were entirely controlled by the Chicago outfit. And at the very top of that pyramid sat Tony Accardo. The builder, blinded by the sheer volume of money flowing through the project accounts, saw what he believed was a golden opportunity. He realized that a massive portion of the mob's investment money was moving entirely in the shadows, off the official tax books, and hidden from government regulators. In his deeply flawed, profoundly greedy logic, he figured that the men running the Chicago outfit were nothing more than uneducated street thugs. He genuinely believed that while they might know how to run an illegal card game or extort a local bakery, they knew absolutely nothing about the complex logistics of commercial structural engineering. He decided to initiate a massive skimming operation. His plan was dangerously simple but highly effective in the short term. He began purchasing extremely cheap substandard cement and low-grade steel rebar from unregulated suppliers, completely ignoring the strict architectural safety requirements of the massive industrial build. He then systematically falsified the project invoices, billing the hidden mafia investors for top-tier, premium-grade construction materials. The difference between the cheap materials he used and the premium materials he billed for was staggering. Over the course of several months, he managed to successfully siphon exactly $500,000 from the project's hidden budget, funneling the illicit cash into his own secret offshore accounts. To put that into perspective, $500,000 during that era was an absolutely life-changing fortune. The builder thought he was an absolute genius. He walked around the busy construction site in his expensive hard hat, looking at the mafia-appointed union foreman with a sense of hidden superiority. He truly believed he had successfully robbed the most dangerous syndicate in the world and gotten away with it completely clean. But this arrogant contractor fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the organization he was dealing with. Tony Accardo did not build a 50-year, multi-billion-dollar empire by being stupid or oblivious. The Chicago outfit had eyes and ears integrated into every single level of the city's infrastructure. They did not just employ enforcers with baseball bats, they employed highly educated shadow accountants, corrupt structural inspectors, and ruthless auditors who knew exactly what premium-grade concrete looked like and how much it was supposed to cost. The massive discrepancy in the budget and the noticeably poor quality of the foundation pours were discovered almost immediately by Accardo's men on the ground. When the grim news of the $500,000 theft finally traveled up the chain of command and reached the insulated, quiet circle of Tony Accardo, the reaction was not one of explosive rage. There was no screaming, no breaking of furniture, and no frantic orders to immediately shoot the builder in the street. To Accardo, a bullet was far too quick, far too merciful, and far too forgettable. A simple assassination would not teach the rest of the corrupt city a lasting lesson. Accardo understood that true power is maintained not just by eliminating those who cross you, but by orchestrating a punishment so uniquely horrifying and absolute that the mere whisper of it would prevent anyone else from ever attempting a similar betrayal. He wanted this arrogant thief to fully understand the exact weight of his catastrophic mistake. He wanted him to feel the consequences of his greed. This is where the true psychological terror of the mafia's methodology begins. Accardo's men did not hunt the builder down. They did not ambush his car or kick down the front door of his luxury home. Instead, they weaponized the man's own massive ego against him. A senior associate of the Chicago outfit, a man who had previously dealt with the builder on legitimate site issues, placed a simple, polite phone call to the contractor's office. The associate did not sound angry. In fact, he sounded incredibly pleased. He warmly congratulated the builder on his spectacular progress. He told the greedy contractor that the hidden bosses downtown were absolutely thrilled with how fast and efficiently the deep foundation work was moving forward. He fed the builder's delusions of grandeur, telling him that he was considered the best contractor the syndicate had ever hired. And then the associate delivered the fatal bait. He told the builder that Tony Accardo himself was so thoroughly impressed with the profit margins of the operation that he wanted to personally reward him. The associate explained that a special, untraceable cash bonus of $50,000 had been authorized for the builder, but because of the sensitive, off-the-books nature of the funds, the handoff had to be done in absolute secrecy. The builder was instructed to drive alone to the massive, desolate construction site late that night, long after the union workers had gone home. He was told to wait down inside the deepest excavated trench, where the central structural pillars were scheduled to be poured the following morning. It is almost impossible to comprehend the level of psychological blindness required to accept this invitation, but the builder's ego completely erased any natural survival instincts he might have possessed. He was so incredibly arrogant, so deeply convinced of his own unparalleled brilliance, that he did not see the glaring red flags waving right in front of his face. He actually believed that the fearsome Chicago outfit was rewarding him for stealing from them. Later that night, under the cover of a pitch-black, moonless Chicago sky, the builder drove his expensive luxury sedan out to the abandoned industrial sector. The massive construction site was entirely silent, a sprawling landscape of dark dirt mounds, towering steel cranes, and deep, cavernous shadows. The air was cold and still. He parked his vehicle near the perimeter fence, grabbed a flashlight, and eagerly walked past the silent, heavy machinery. He made his way to the center of the site exactly as he was instructed, and began to climb down the rough dirt path into the massive, excavated foundation pit. The pit was easily 20 feet deep and as wide as a house, a massive cavern carved into the earth. The bottom was a complex, intimidating cage of heavy, rusted steel rebar waiting to be encased in solid rock. The builder stood at the bottom of this dark, lonely trench, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. He checked his expensive watch, his heart likely racing with the thrilling anticipation of being handed a thick envelope stuffed with untraceable $100 bills. He felt powerful. He felt like a king who had successfully conquered the criminal underworld. He stood there in the freezing darkness, completely isolated from the rest of the sleeping city, waiting for the mafia to arrive and pay him for his supposed genius. Suddenly, the heavy, suffocating silence of the abandoned construction site was broken. But it was not the quiet, subtle purr of a sleek mafia luxury car approaching the edge of the pit. It was a deep, rumbling, mechanical roar that vibrated through the cold earth beneath his expensive leather boots. The builder looked up toward the rim of the massive trench, confused by the heavy, industrial sound. Out of the darkness, a fleet of massive, heavy-duty diesel trucks slowly pulled up to the very edge of the excavation. Before the builder could even begin to process what was happening or formulate a single thought of escape, a row of blinding, high-intensity halogen work lights suddenly snapped on, illuminating the entire pit with the harsh, unforgiving intensity of a prison yard. The builder, shielding his eyes from the blinding glare, finally saw the horrifying reality of his situation. The vehicles surrounding the rim of his deep dirt prison were not passenger cars. They were massive, industrial cement mixer trucks. The enormous steel drums on the back of the heavy vehicles were already rotating, churning thousands of pounds of thick, heavy, unyielding sludge. There were no hitmen standing at the edge of the pit, pointing weapons down at him. There was no dramatic villainous speech echoing in the night. There was no demand for the return of the stolen $500,000. There was only the deafening, relentless, terrifying mechanical roar of the heavy diesel engines and the grinding of the mixing drums. Panic, absolute and paralyzing, finally shattered the builder's arrogant delusions. He instantly realized the catastrophic nature of his mistake. The $50,000 cash bonus was a phantom. The praise was a carefully constructed lie. The Chicago outfit knew exactly what he had done, and they had guided him, step by step, directly into his own permanent grave. The heavy hydraulic metal chutes on the back of the massive trucks were slowly, methodically lowered over the steep dirt edges, pointing directly down into the deep cage of steel rebar where the builder was standing. The execution was completely devoid of any human emotion. It was an industrial process. With a heavy, wet, rushing sound, the pouring began. Thousands of pounds of thick, dark, suffocating wet concrete cascaded down the metal chutes and plummeted into the trench. It hit the bottom with a heavy, sickening thud, immediately splashing against the steel rebar and wrapping around the builder's legs. The sheer physical weight and immense density of commercial-grade, wet cement is something the human body is simply not equipped to fight. Within seconds, the thick, grey sludge had completely engulfed his boots, anchoring him to the floor of the pit with the strength of a vice grip. The builder screamed into the blinding lights above him, a desperate, primal sound of absolute terror that was entirely swallowed by the roaring engines of the trucks. He frantically grabbed at the sharp, rusted steel rebar surrounding him, tearing the skin from his hands as he desperately tried to pull his heavy body weight upward, fighting against the relentless rising tide of the concrete. But the sheer volume of the material pouring down upon him was insurmountable. Wet cement does not act like water. It acts like thick, heavy mud that creates a massive vacuum effect, pulling whatever is trapped inside it deeper down with every single movement. Every frantic struggle, every desperate attempt to pull his legs free, only exhausted him faster and caused him to sink deeper into the heavy, suffocating trap. The men operating the heavy machinery up on the rim of the pit did not look down at the struggling, screaming man below them. They wore hard hats and heavy jackets, their faces obscured by the harsh backlighting. They simply operated the hydraulic levers with the cold, detached efficiency of factory workers completing a late-night shift. They watched the gauges on their trucks, ensuring the pour was steady and even, completely ignoring the agonizing, horrific struggle taking place 20 feet below them. They were simply following the quiet, absolute orders of Tony Accardo, executing a sentence that had been decided the very moment the builder decided to steal his first dollar. The thick, cold sludge quickly rose past the builder's knees, crushing his legs with immense, agonizing hydrostatic pressure. It rose to his waist, completely immobilizing his lower body, making it physically impossible for him to move even an inch. The cold, wet weight of the material began to compress his chest, making every single panicked breath an exhausting, terrifying struggle. He was forced to watch in slow, agonizing proximity as his entire existence was methodically erased by the very building materials he had tried to exploit. The pouring did not stop. It was relentless, heavy, and absolute. The grey mass rose to his chest, then to his shoulders, sealing him perfectly within the complex web of steel reinforcement bars. When the deep foundation pit was finally filled to the exact architectural specifications, perfectly level with the surrounding earth, the operators slowly raised the heavy metal chutes. The massive mixing drums groaned to a halt. The blinding halogen work lights were snapped off, instantly plunging the desolate construction site back into the deep, quiet darkness of the Chicago night. The heavy diesel engines were put into gear, and the fleet of cement trucks slowly drove away, their tires crunching against the gravel, leaving the area exactly as they had found it. There was no blood left behind to clean up. There was no crime scene for the police to photograph. There was absolutely no trace of the arrogant contractor who thought he was a criminal genius. He was left in the dark, buried beneath thousands upon thousands of pounds of a material that was specifically engineered by science to rapidly cure and harden into solid, unbreakable rock. He was perfectly encased, entombed forever, alongside the $500,000 he would never get to spend. This horrifying event remains one of the darkest, most chilling testaments to the absolute power and ruthless ingenuity of the Chicago outfit during their golden era. It perfectly illustrates the terrifying reality of what happens when a person mistakes quiet insulation for weakness. The greedy builder played a dangerous game of deception, relying on falsified invoices and hidden bank accounts. Tony Accardo responded with a display of absolute, inescapable permanence. He did not just order the elimination of a minor threat, he orchestrated a masterpiece of psychological terror, using the thief's own blinding arrogance to completely seal his fate. The man who tried to scam the ghost of Chicago learned, in the most agonizing and claustrophobic way imaginable, that the mafia does not forgive debts, they do not rely on the justice system, and they will gladly use your own overwhelming greed to build the very foundation of your permanent destruction.